Hello, tonight. The streets smell of wood smoke, wet leather, and boiling tar. A stiff breeze presses against your cloak as you stroll beneath the creaking lanterns of a small New England port. The year is 1773. Somewhere nearby, a man is loudly cursing the price of molasses, and a group of boys are carving "no tax" without voice into the side of a barrel. The mood, let's call it tense, with a dash of theatrical outrage. You probably won't survive this journey. Not because of musket fire or powdered wigs, though both are alarmingly common, but because the swirling emotions and contradictions of the American colonies may tie your thoughts in philosophical knots. Luckily, you're just here to listen, so before you relax, consider liking and subscribing, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background noise, and let's slowly begin tonight's voyage. You drift along crooked cobblestone alleys where orange lantern light flickers off brick and bone. There's a tension in the air like a violin string stretched a bit too tight. In Boston, Philadelphia, Charleston, and beyond, 13 colonies ache with contradiction. British subjects, yes, but beginning to murmur, question, even dream of something bigger, or at least less British. You pass a man arguing with a red-coated soldier. He waves a rolled newspaper and demands to know why the King taxes his sugar but won't fix the muddy roads outside his farm. The soldier shrugs, he's just here for the chowder. That's the thing about empire. It's great on parchment but messy in practice. Scholars still debate exactly what pushed ordinary farmers, silversmiths, and seamstresses to the edge. Was it economic desperation, philosophical awakening, or just a lot of really bad decisions by Parliament? But one thing's clear. By the early 1770s, protests were no longer whispers. You hear tavern songs sung off-key, their lyrics mocking royal governors and calling for local councils. At the docks, a group of apprentices flips crates labeled property of the East India Company upside down, still bottle, but effective rebellion. You step into a print shop where a man in an inky apron is setting fresh type, a discourse on the rights of man. He's humming, and as you look around, you realize half the pamphlets on his shelf are illegal. The other half are just poorly edited, but both are dangerous. One widely accepted fact: ideas spread faster than ships. By the time London tried to react to one fire, 2 others were already burning. The colonies were no longer docile outposts, they were buzzing hives of independent thought, fueled by Enlightenment thinkers and the occasional angry baker. A marginal truth: a few of the most influential revolutionary essays were written anonymously by teenage girls. Yes, behind those lace collars and modest smiles were minds sharper than bayonets. One such writer, signed only as Lucia, a friend to liberty, and her poem comparing King George to a sulking toddler became so popular that even British officers started quoting it, though not out loud. You pass a church where bells are ringing not for prayer, but for assembly. The pews inside hold not just worshippers but organizers' folks with fiery eyes and very detailed lists of grievances. One man is drawing a crude map of local loyalist homes. Another is passing around a small bag of coins, whispering about printing more truth papers. And through it all, you sense the slow pulse of momentum. It doesn't look like revolution, yet it looks like poorly organized arguments and badly brewed cider. But history often starts like that. Not with gunfire, but with awkward meetings and lots of awkwardly folded parchment outside the city. You watch as farmers sit around a stump, passing a pipe and discussing a recent pamphlet by someone named Payne. One says he'd rather risk hanging than keep paying taxes for a crown he's never seen. The others nod somberly. The wind shifts. You smell pine, horse sweat, and something metallic change perhaps. Later, in the stillness before dawn, you pass a child asleep on a porch bench, clutching a wooden musket carved by his older brother. His dreams are quiet. For now, you glance back at the town flickering lights, shadows moving behind curtains, small lives full of enormous questions. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to understand the contradiction of this place, fiercely loyal, yet itching for freedom, bound by law, yet already breaking its threads. A colony, yes, but already dreaming of stars. The harbor glistens under the pale winter moon, and you find yourself crouched behind stacked crates of salted cod, breath curling in the air. Around you, cloaked figures whisper and rustle, the faint scent of pitch and feathers in the wind. You've wandered into something strange, tonight part ceremony, part protest, part theatrical prank. You are at Griffin's Wharf, and the tea is about to fly. A ship creaks as it rocks gently in the water. Its cargo, hundreds of chests filled with East India Company tea, perfectly stacked, perfectly taxed, and perfectly symbolic of everything that's wrong with the empire. The British think they're being clever by selling cheap tea directly to the colonies. The colonists think it's an insult. You're just hoping your boots don't squeak. Suddenly, a figure gives the signal. A shout, a whoop, and then chaos-controlled, exuberant chaos. Men disguised as Mohawk warriors leap aboard, and with practiced rhythm, they begin smashing open the tea chests and dumping them into the sea. You see dark leaves swirling like seaweed on the tide, steam rising where hot protest meets cold salt water. The scene is loud but oddly joyful. There's a strange sense of release in the air. This is the Boston Tea Party, a protest so iconic, so oddly polite, no property stolen, no people harmed. It feels more like performance art than insurrection. But oh, does it hit the mark? The British are not amused. A widely accepted fact. The Boston Tea Party led directly to the coercive axe, also known as the Intolerable Axe. Boston's port is closed. The colonial charter is revoked, and British soldiers are housed in private homes. Basically, Parliament flips the board. A marginal truth. Not all colonists supported the Tea Party. Some called it wasteful and reckless after all. Tea was expensive, and the economy fragile. One merchant, watching from his rooftop, muttered, "There goes my winter blend." Scholars still debate whether the disguises were symbolic or cowardly. Were they claiming native identity in solidarity, or hiding behind it to avoid blame? Either way, the feathers and paint make the headlines. You wander down the wharf after the last crate is emptied. There's laughter, yes, but also something quieter, nervous glances, the weight of what's been done. This wasn't just tea. This was defiance, brewed strong and served hot. And it can't be undone. The next morning, the city wakes to the scent of damp wood and rebellious consequences. Loyalists whisper, and British officials sharpen their pens. Punishment is coming. Everyone knows it. You pass by a meeting house, where townsfolk gather to write letters, organize boycotts, and argue over what's next. One man slams his fist on a table. If they can tax tea, they can tax bread, firewood, our very breath. A woman across from him calmly replies, or, "We could try not starting a war." There's no consensus, but there is momentum. Later that day, you sit on the edge of a barrel, watching a boy chase his hat down the muddy street. He's laughing, oblivious to politics. But over his laughter, you hear it, the low drumbeat of protest turning to movement. The tea is gone, but its bitterness lingers. You walk along the docks again at twilight. A gull shrieks overhead, and you wonder how long until the next spark, until the whispers become shouts. And will the men dumping tea tonight be seen as heroes or hooligans? History doesn't say. But you were there. You saw the moonlit feathers, the swirling leaves, the fire in their eyes. And you know one thing, for sure, this story isn't cooling down, it's just steeping. You follow the scent of leather and ink into a crowded hall, where the air is thick with tobacco smoke and louder with disagreement. It's the First Continental Congress, and let's just say this isn't your average book club. You find a quiet spot on the wooden balcony above, settling in beside a creaky banister as delegates from 12 colonies Georgia decided to ghost argue, orate, and occasionally throw sideways glances at one another like they're in a colonial reality show. You recognize faces already stirring up whispers in the streets. John Adams, intense and wide-eyed, scribbling notes at a speed that would terrify quills. Patrick Henry, pacing like a man with fire under his shoes. And George Washington, leaning back in stately silence, measuring every word like it weighs a cannonball. They've come not to break away, not yet, but to push back, to plead, and perhaps to threaten. Just a little, a widely accepted fact. This Congress convened in 1774 in Philadelphia, in direct response to the intolerable acts passed after the Boston Tea Party. It was the first real attempt to unify the colonies under one coordinated political body, an awkward alliance held together with parchment and personal pride. Marginal truth: the sessions were, at times, painfully tedious. James Duane of New York reportedly described them as days-long and largely fruitless, and more than one delegate snuck out for urgent business, which may or may not have involved ale. Scholars still debate how sincere the delegates truly were about reconciliation. Some came ready to make peace, others had war stitched into their waistcoats. Was the olive branch petition genuine hope or strategic theatre? Ask 10 historians and receive 12 answers. The debate below swells like a storm tide. One man slams his palm against the table, demanding an embargo against British goods. Another warns that unity is illusion, that Virginia is not Massachusetts, and neither trusts the other. You sense they're walking a tightrope above a river of revolution, and the rope is fraying. You glance down and see a delegate muttering a prayer before he stands to speak. Another rolls his eyes. Politics, it seems, hasn't changed much. But despite the arguments, despite the heat, they're building something unprecedented. A conversation across colonies. A chorus of concerns turning into, maybe, a constitution. You leave before the final gavel falls, stepping into the Philadelphia night, where horses stomp restlessly outside, and the scent of fresh bread from a nearby tavern tempts even the most stoic revolutionaries. In an alley, you overhear 2 young printers whispering about pamphlets, one of them grinning. We'll call it common sense, maybe. The other shrugs. Too obvious. They laugh, but you catch a glimpse of something behind it. Fear, yes, but also purpose. You pass by a stable, where a courier mounts his horse with a satchel full of letters. His path stretches from New Hampshire to the Carolinas. No phones, no emails, just hoofbeats and ink, and somehow it works. You sit beneath a flickering lantern and wonder, Will these men be remembered as visionaries, traitors, lunatics? It's too early to tell. But the idea has taken root: unity, not as a dream, but as a choice. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the low murmur of arguments fading into the night. In the distance, a bell tolls. Not yet liberty, but a rehearsal. The morning mist hasn't lifted when you find yourself following a ragtag column of colonial militia. Muskets slung over their shoulders and determination clinging to them like the dew. You're walking just behind a boy who can't be more than 16, his boots too large, his coat too short, his courage perhaps too big for his body. He adjusts the strap on his powder horn and glances nervously at the older men, trying to match their pace. They're headed toward Lexington. Birdsong is interrupted only by whispered prayers, and the occasional click of flint being checked and rechecked. You pass a quiet farmhouse where the shutters are drawn, and a woman watches through a crack, her child clutched to her side. No one says it, but everyone knows. Something irreversible is about to begin. Widely accepted historical fact. On April 19, 1775, British troops marched toward Concord to seize colonial weapons, and at Lexington Green, they were met by a small band of militia. The first shot was fired here. The shot heard round the world. What people rarely mention: that it was still dark, that the British troops wore wool and marched on sore feet after a night of marching, that many of the colonial men stood in stunned silence, unsure if they were soldiers or simply angry farmers with muskets and raisin scholars. Still debate who fired that first shot. Some say it was a colonial, others a British regular, and some believe it was accidental altogether. A misfire, a mistake, a moment with consequences no one fully understood. You stand beside a tree as the British line forms across the green. Their boots strike rhythmically against packed earth. Their red coats blaze like banners. The colonial militia stares them down, no uniforms, just homespun cloth and resolve. Then, the sharp crack of gunfire, smoke screams, horses rearing. The boy ahead of you stumbles and drops his musket, blinking through the haze. In less than 2 minutes, it's over. Bodies lie still in the grass. 8 colonists dead, 10 wounded. The British move on toward Concord, their formation tightening. You walk beside them now, and the silence is eerie, punctuated only by the distant bleating of a goat and the creak of wagon wheels. This isn't yet a war, but the bridge has burned in Concord. You witness the militias regrouping rear now, more organized, firing from behind trees, fences, stone walls. Guerrilla warfare, they'll later call it. The British retreat becomes a gauntlet. By the time they return to Boston, they've suffered over 250 casualties, and the colonists realize something. They can fight. They can bleed, yes, but so can the Empire. You ride atop a cart back into the countryside, passing fields stained with gunpowder and fresh-turned soil. A farmer lowers his hat as you pass. A young girl ties a black ribbon in her hair. A minister stands at a pulpit in an open barn, quoting Ecclesiastes about seasons for war. You pause at a hill overlooking the road, where an old man with a spyglass mutters, "Well, it's begun." You don't ask what he means, because somehow you already know. By nightfall, fires flicker across New England, not of destruction, but of campfires, gathering points, quiet readiness. Across taverns and churches and kitchen tables, a word spreads like wind. Revolution. You settle beside a brook where a drummer boy taps out a rhythm on his empty tin cup. You both watch the sky, silent, It is no longer the same. You wake to the soft rattle of tin cups and the faint smell of ash campfire smoke mingled with morning fog. The drummer boy from last night is gone, replaced by a woman stirring something thick and brown in a dented kettle. Chicory, she mumbles without looking up. Not coffee, but close enough. Around you, colonial volunteers stretch sore limbs, adjust worn leather belts, and whisper about Boston. The city is now surrounded, held in check by men with farming calluses and patchy uniforms, led by generals who learned war from books, or guesswork. You hear murmurs of names like Israel Putnam and Artemus Ward, but one name cuts through more often: Washington, widely accepted historical fact. In June of 1775, the Second Continental Congress appointed George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. He hadn't fought a real battle in years, but he had a certain presence, stoic and good with a horse. That last part mattered more than you'd think. You walk with a group of soldiers toward a rise overlooking Boston. The British are bottled up in the city, but they're watching, always watching. Across the water, redcoats shimmer in the distance, tiny as toy soldiers, until you remember they're not toys, and their muskets are real. There's tension in the air now, not fear, exactly something more electric, like a storm that hasn't broken yet. A plan is forming, an earthwork is being dug, and you, curious and silent, walk toward a name soon to be etched in every history book. Bunker Hill. Except marginal fact, it wasn't really Bunker Hill. The main fighting took place on Breed's Hill, slightly closer to Boston. But names, like battles, often go to the loudest storyteller. June 17th, 1775. You crouch in a trench behind the colonial lines, watching men hastily throw up wooden defenses, digging with spoons, axes, bare hands. A carpenter from Rhode Island pauses to scratch a sketch of the harbor in the dirt. A preacher nearby prays with his eyes open. The British begin their centros of disciplined red, bayonets gleaming. The colonial officer beside you whispers, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." Scholars still debate whether anyone actually said that, but it sounds good in a book, and even better on a battlefield. Then everything erupts. Gunfire, cannon smoke, men shouting, bleeding, falling. The air is heavy with sulfur and terror. 3 times the British climb the hill. Twice they're driven back. On the third, the colonials run out of powder and are forced to retreat. Technically, it's a British victory, but you see it in their faces as they descend. It's a win that feels a lot like loss. Over 1,000 British troops lie wounded or dead. The colonials have that. You sit on a stump and breathe through your sleeve, trying not to choke on the smoke. A nearby man wipes his bayonet clean with part of his shirt, then stops and stares at it like it's no longer part of him. You wander through the aftermath: abandoned hats, broken muskets, blood-soaked grass. A scrap of music from a fife floats through the haze, off-key but brave. Washington hasn't arrived yet, but his war has already begun without him. Later, you sit beside a wounded soldier being patched up with linen strips and pine sap. He smiles weakly. "We held them, didn't we?" You nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the sun sinks behind the ridgeline, the hill is quiet again, except now it's different. The grass remembers, the stones remember, and you, though you've come from nowhere, know this moment is already echoing forward in time. The hill fades behind you, and the war shifts shape. Now you find yourself walking beside the Potomac, the water glassy and still, like a mirror too tired to ripple. Washington has finally arrived, and you catch your first glimpse of him. Somber hair, powdered, and coat spotless, despite the dust clinging to everyone else. He doesn't speak much, but his presence alone seems to quiet the camp. Orders pass with fewer arguments, and men sharpen their bayonets with a little more purpose. You wonder if leadership is just the art of making people believe you know where you're going. Even when the road is made of mud and uncertainty, Washington takes command of the Continental Army in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's your next stop, just outside Harvard Yard, where men drill in ragged lines, stepping over ancient tree roots and half-frozen patches of grass. The army is more idea than institution. No uniforms, no discipline, no real supplies, just farmers with muskets and dreams of freedom that smell faintly of gunpowder and damp wool. A widely accepted historical fact: the Continental Army in 1775 was poorly trained, poorly fed, and dangerously low on ammunition. Many soldiers brought their own weapons, wore homespun clothes, and had never marched in formation before joining. Washington inspects the troops with a gaze that could sand wood. He says little, but somehow inspires more than a rousing speech. Nearby, a young man from Connecticut is digging latrines and grumbling about rations. He looks like a statue, he mutters, jerking his head toward the general. Bet he don't even sweat. You laugh quietly. Washington does sweat, just not where anyone can see. In private, you overhear him at his desk, pacing over letters, filled with despair. Not enough powder, not enough food, and soldiers deserting every morning. But he never lets it show. That, you think, is what makes a statue come alive. As days stretch into weeks, you begin to feel the slow grind of siege. Warfare. The British remain holed up in Boston, their ships anchored like patient wolves. The Continentals dig in, constructing fortifications, sharing news from distant colonies, and inventing new ways to cook hardtack so it doesn't crack their teeth. In half, one evening, a soldier plays a violin by the fire, the notes curling upward like smoke. Another reads aloud from a book of ancient Roman military tactics, mispronouncing most of it, but no one cares. Even in war, people crave routines, something to tether them to a version of themselves that isn't always afraid. Then comes a small miracle, marginal fact. In early 1776, Henry Knox, a former bookseller with zero military training, successfully transported 60 tons of captured British artillery from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston using ox-drawn sleds over 300 miles of frozen wilderness. You witness his trudging through snow, wheels creaking beneath their burden. Men cheer as cannons appear on the hills overlooking Boston, pointed squarely at the British ships below. The message is clear: leave, or be buried in ice and iron. And then they leave. On March 17th, 1776, the British evacuate Boston, abandoning the city to Washington's army. You walk through the emptied streets in no battle, no bloodshed, just silence and flags flapping. In cold wind, scholars still debate why the British retreated so suddenly. Some say Knox's cannons tipped the scale. Others argue internal politics or disease weakened their will. Either way, Boston is free, and Washington, once doubted, now rides through the city to thunderous applause. You find yourself atop a nearby church steeple as dusk falls, watching lanterns flicker to life in homes once darkened by occupation. A woman leans out a window and sings softly in French. Children run through the cobblestone alleys, chasing the echo of their own footsteps. For a moment, you believe this might be the end, but the war, like a river, always finds new ground to flood. And so, you step down from the steeple, your boots echoing on the wood, and follow Washington south into the next shadow. You march with the army through the long arms of spring, the snow giving way to mud, the air thickening with promise and mosquitoes. The trees begin to bloom, and for a moment the war feels far away, just a dark cloud on the edge of a bright sky, but it follows. You find yourself in New York, where the streets are wider, the air saltier, and everything moves faster, even the panic. It's the summer of 1776, and everyone seems to know something big is coming. In taverns and alleyways, they whisper about declarations and kings, about ideas being inked onto parchment with trembling hands. Then you hear it. A rider thunders through the city, waving a sealed document. People gather. The crowd swells like a wave, and someone begins to read. You push forward, heart racing. These are the words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The Declaration of Independence is read aloud in public for the first time, a widely accepted historical fact. On July 9th, 1776, George Washington had the Declaration read to the troops in New York City, hoping to lift morale before a feared British invasion. You look around. The soldiers stand taller. The apprentices shout. One old man weeps and salutes a tattered colonial flag hanging from a lamppost. But not everyone cheers. Some faces stay stony, unsure, and off to the side, a British loyalist spits in the dirt. The ink is still drying. But war doesn't wait for signatures. Soon after, British ships fill the harbor like metal leviathans, their sails blotting out the sun. You count them, 10, 20, more than 100. Each carries soldiers, supplies, and a promise of pain. The invasion begins. The Battle of Brooklyn is the largest battle of the entire war. You'll dare muddy boots, burning lungs, the stench of gunpowder and panic. The British strike hard, swift, and with terrifying precision. The Continental Army is outflanked, outnumbered, and almost crushed. You scramble with Washington's men through the Gowanus marshes, bullets snapping like angry bees. A drummer boy drops beside you, his drum still tied to his chest. You keep moving. There's no time to mourn. Night falls, and fog rolls in like a divine favor. Marginal fact: during the miraculous nighttime evacuation across the East River, an elite regiment of fishermen from Marblehead, Massachusetts, rowed thousands of men silently across the water, evading British patrols completely. You sit in one of the boats, soaked and shivering, as oars cut through the black water. The city flickers behind you, and the fog thickens, swallowing the lights. No one speaks. No one dares to breathe too loud. Even the river seems to understand the stakes. Washington waits until the last man is across before stepping into the final boat himself. You remember how his eyes searched the darkness, counting heads, calculating risks. He looks tired now, mortal, but unbroken. Scholars still debate whether it was divine intervention or tactical brilliance that saved the Continental Army that night. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. But you were there, and it felt like a heartbeat, away from a miracle. Later, as you rest beneath the skeletal branches of a tree on the outskirts of Manhattan, you watch as the city burns. British troops pour in. Loyalists raise their glasses, and the rebels, what's left of them, scatter like dandelion seeds on the wind. The war has taken a sharp turn, but so have you. Now, you don't just watch, you carry messages between units. Learn the terrain, help tend to the wounded. You belong to the shadows between battles, where history is made by those no one remembers. And as you drift to sleep that night, the words from that declaration echo faintly in your ears. All men are created equal. You wonder, is that a promise or a hope? The road ahead winds through the autumn woods of New Jersey, the trees now dressed in burnt orange and faded gold, as if nature herself mourns what the colonies are becoming. You walk carefully, each footstep could find a musket, a trap, or, worse, an enemy scout. The sun hangs low, casting long shadows that stretch like ghostly fingers across the forest floor. Then you see him again. Washington. He's not the marble statue they'll one day carve in his image. He's tired, cold, wrapped in a worn cloak, the firelight reflecting in his eyes as he studies a map by candlelight. Around him, the air smells of damp wool and pipe smoke, tinged with something heavier dashed out. It's late 1776, and the revolution is bleeding. The Continental Army has dwindled. Morale is threadbare. Soldiers desert. Supplies vanish. Winter bites through every wool coat. The cause itself hangs by a thread woven from determination and desperation. You sit near the fire, watching men play dice with empty bellies, laughing too loudly just to remember how. A widely accepted historical fact. By December 1776, Washington's army had shrunk to less than 2,500 men, most unpaid, many shoeless, and most with enlistments expiring in days. But Washington doesn't retreat into despair. He does something bolder. He plans an attack. It sounds mad, even to you. Cross the icy Delaware River in the dead of night, on Christmas Day no less, and surprise a garrison of Hessian soldiers in Trenton. Madness, but maybe that's what the moment requires. Not logic, but legend. Marginal fact. The password for the night of the crossing was victory or death, whispered from frozen lips as the army moved in silence. You're handed an oar. The boat rocks. The river growls, half frozen and treacherous. Ice clinks against the hull. A soldier next to you is quietly crying. You say nothing. You grip the oar harder. Across the river, the fires of Trenton flicker in the dock, warm, unaware. You reach the other side just before dawn. You march through sleet, muskets soaked, boots torn, breath turning to ice in the air. And when the surprise attack begins, you see something extraordinary. Precision, confidence, vengeance. It's over in 45 minutes. The Hessians, half drunk and unprepared, surrender. A cheer rises not just for the victory, but for the feeling of finally winning something. Scholars still debate how significant the Battle of Trenton truly was. Some say it was just a minor skirmish, but for the soldiers who fought it, for the people who heard the news days later, it was nothing short of resurrection. And you survive. You help tie captured muskets into bundles, comfort a wounded friend, and eat your first full meal in weeks. You even smile, briefly, a real, forgotten kind of smile. The next day, word spreads like fire on dry parchment. We won at Trenton. Suddenly, men start re-enlisting. Volunteers return. The revolution breathes again. Washington follows the win. With another surprise strike at Princeton. The British reel, the tides shift. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably, as you travel back with the army through snowy fields. You pass homesteads where windows glow like lanterns of hope. A woman steps out and hands you a wool scarf. For liberty, she says. You wrap it around your neck. It's warm, and it smells like home that night. As you curl under your coat and stare up at the frost-laced sky, you realize something strange. You're beginning to believe this might all be possible. Not guaranteed, not safe, but possible. The stars above shimmer like frost on silver dot, and somewhere out there a king sleeps unaware that his colonies just struck back. The fire pops softly beside you, embers fluttering like fireflies into the cold night air, while distant owls call from the pine woods outside Valley Forge. It's the winter of 1777, and the war has settled into frostbitten silence. You wrap your borrowed cloak tighter, watching your breath drift upward like ghostly prayers toward a heaven that frankly feels very far away right now. Valley Forge is less a military camp and more a slow-motion test of human will. Snow seeps in through the cracks of every wooden hut, and the smell smoke, wet earth, unwashed bodies is everywhere. You try not to gag when the stew arrives, because stew is just a kind word for water and roots. A man near you is missing half a boot. Another lost his fingers last week. Somehow, they still laugh. A widely accepted historical fact, nearly 2,000 soldiers died at Valley Forge, not from battle, but from disease, starvation, and exposure during the brutal winter of 1777 to 78. But here's the thing, they didn't quit. Why? Because a new figure arrives, wrapped in mystery and a thick Prussian accent. Baron von Steuben, a marginal fact. Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, the man who would train the Continental Army, wasn't actually a baron or even a general when he arrived. He was, however, brilliant, theatrical, and extremely good at shouting in several languages. You meet him during a drill. He screams something at a young soldier who can't figure out which way is left. The next moment, von Steuben is beside him, guiding his stance, correcting his grip. Then he turns, winks at you, and mutters something about turning these ragged scarecrows into an army. And slowly, it works. He trains you with wooden muskets first, because real ones are too valuable. You repeat formations again and again, feet freezing, stomach growling. But one day somehow you march in perfect step with 50 others, and the sound of synchronized boots over hard ground feels like thunder. Scholars still debate whether Valley Forge was a turning point in the war or simply a symbolic trial. But no one denies that it hardened the army into something real, something unified. Letters from home arrive, the ink smeared but the words warming. "Keep going," one says. Another simply, "We believe in you." That night, you sit by the fire with a man from Rhode Island and a former farmer from Georgia. You share a story, a scrap of bread, and a joke about how even the British Red probably have better blankets. The laughter is thin, but it's real, and it keeps you alive. Then, spring breaks. The snow melts like a curse lifting, revealing a battlefield in waiting beneath. Flowers return to the hills, and the rivers no longer groan under ice. Von Steuben's drills continue, more intense now, but you're ready. Your hands are calloused, your back straighter, and your heart heavier, but steadier. There's word of a new engagement brewing, one that will test all of this training. Washington walks among the troops, nodding once to you, just once, but it's enough. You don't know it yet, but the Battle of Monmouth is just over the horizon. And soon the world will see what those frozen nights in Valley Forge forged in you. But for now, you sleep. And for once, you don't dream of food or home. You dream of holding the line. The sun scorches the fields near Monmouth, New Jersey. As you stand among the assembled Continental soldiers, the heat nearly as fierce as the tension in the air. Muskets gleam in the afternoon light, and sweat drips beneath your Keston tunic, mixing with the dust of a battlefield poised to erupt. Washington's gaze sweeps the ranks. Calm but steelious, he prepares to confront the British forces retreating from Philadelphia, marking one of the war's largest and most brutal engagements. A widely accepted historical fact, the Battle of Monmouth, fought on June 28, 1778, was one of the longest battles of the American Revolution, lasting through a sweltering summer day and showcasing the newly trained Continental Army's improved discipline. But here's a marginal fact. Legend has it that Molly Pitcher, a woman who carried water to thirsty soldiers, even took over firing a cannon when her husband fell, embodying the fierce spirit of those fighting for independence. As cannon smoke curls into the Kamjagi sky, orders bark through the ranks, and you find yourself shoulder to shoulder with comrades from far-flung colonies, united in purpose but wary of the chaos ahead. The crack of musket fire erupts, punctuated by the clash of bayonets and the thundering roar of artillery. You feel your heart hammer in your chest, adrenaline mingling with fear. Scholars still debate the battle's outcome. Was it a tactical draw or a strategic victory for the Americans? Yet it undeniably proved the Continental Army could stand toe-to-toe with the British regulars. Amid the smoke and sweat, you glimpse Washington, cool and commanding, his calm presence an anchor amid the chaos. The battle pushes on through the heat until twilight, the sun dipping behind dark clouds as the gunfire finally fades. You stagger with exhaustion, but stand taller, hardened by fire and forged by discipline. That night, under a dusky sky, you and your fellow soldiers whisper stories of the day, sharing laughter, pain, and cautious hope. You clutch a letter from home, the ink blurred but the words clear. Freedom is near. And for the first time in a long while, you dare to believe it might be true. The crisp autumn air settles over Valley Forge as you trudge through snow-dusted woods, the ground crunching beneath worn boots. The camp is a bitter refuge, where frostbites exposed skin and hunger gnaws relentlessly. Yet beneath the hardship, a quiet determination hums like a distant drum. Around flickering campfires, soldiers wrapped in threadbare cloaks share whispered tales of home, while General Washington moves among them, a steadfast figure of resolve and hope amid the bleak winter. A widely accepted historical fact, the winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge was a brutal test for the Continental Army, marked by severe cold, disease, and starvation, but also crucial training under Baron von Steuben that transformed them into a disciplined fighting force. A marginal fact, some soldiers secretly brewed homemade alcohol, risking discipline to stave off the harsh cold and numb the pain, weaving small acts of rebellion into their daily survival. As you listen to the crackling fires, the debate lingers among commanders. How much did the suffering at Valley Forge actually strengthen the army, and how much did it nearly break their spirit? Scholars still debate the balance between hardship and resilience in this pivotal moment. You tighten your scarf against the biting wind, drawing strength from the shared struggle, knowing that this winter will forge not only muscles and skill, but an unbreakable bond of brotherhood. The distant howl of wolves echoes through the frozen forest, a chilling reminder that nature's harshness rivals the enemy's threats. Yet here, in the quiet endurance beneath star-studded skies, hope flickers. Like the candlelight within every tent, promising that spring will bring new life and freedom. You find yourself on the windswept shores of Yorktown, the sea's salty breath mingling with the tension in the air as cannons roar and smoke billows over the siege. American and French troops, clad in rich kamjabegi and saffron sarisk uniforms, coordinate their final assault, eyes fixed on the British redcoats entrenched behind battered earthworks. The horizon glows with fiery embers, and the scent of gunpowder hangs heavy as you witness a moment where hope and desperation collide. A widely accepted historical fact: the siege of Yorktown in 1781 was the decisive victory that effectively ended the American Revolutionary War, leading to British General Cornwallis's surrender. A marginal fact: French naval forces played a crucial role by blocking British reinforcements, showcasing an early example of international military cooperation. Scholars still debate the extent to which French intervention was decisive versus the Continental Army's own resilience and strategy. Amid the cacophony of battle, you sense the weight of years of struggle culminating in this charged twilight, where every musket shot echoes with the promise of a new nation. The ground trembles beneath your feet as volleys exchange, and the distant cheers of Allied forces rise like a chorus of freedom as smoke clears and the British flag lowers. You feel the electric thrill of victory mingled with the somber recognition of sacrifice. This is a turning point, a moment when the impossible feels within grasp and the dream of independence burns brighter than ever. You tread quietly through the smoky aftermath of Yorktown, where campfires flicker against the cold night and weary soldiers tend to their wounds beneath tattered tents. The air is thick with exhaustion and cautious hope, the ground littered with spent cartridges and the fading echoes of battle songs sung softly in lace-avert and Keston-colored cloaks. Nearby, a young officer writes letters home by flickering candlelight, while others dream of the life that awaits beyond war's shadow. A widely accepted historical fact: after Yorktown, the Treaty of Paris was negotiated, formally recognizing American independence in 1783. A marginal fact: some Continental soldiers suffered from severe frostbite during harsh winter encampments, prompting early experiments with makeshift medical treatments. Scholars still debate how the hardships faced by soldiers influenced early American attitudes toward military service and national identity. You feel the fragile calm settling over the camp, a temporary peace that masks the long road ahead. The distant rustle of trees and the soft murmur of conversations remind you that even in victory, uncertainty lingers. Under the kamjabegi sky, you reflect on the resilience that carried these people through relentless trials, forging a nation from courage and conviction. This quiet moment, tinged with relief and lingering shadows, is a testament to human endurance amid upheaval. You breathe in the night air, carrying whispers of freedom and the promise of dawn. You find yourself in the bustling streets of Philadelphia, where the air hums with anticipation and the scent of ink and parchment fills dimly lit rooms as delegates gather to draft the Constitution. Men in saffron sarisk waistcoats debate fiercely over the shape of a new republic, their voices rising and falling like a slow, deliberate symphony of hope and compromise. Outside, lamplit taverns buzz with discussions about liberty and governance, while the city pulses with the restless energy of revolution's aftermath. A widely accepted historical fact: the United States Constitution was signed in 1787, laying the foundation for the nation's government. A marginal fact: some delegates used coded letters and secret meetings to avoid British spies and internal dissent during the Constitutional Convention. Scholars still debate whether the Constitution balanced power effectively or favored the interests of wealthy elites over common citizens. You sense the weight of this moment, a fragile experiment in democracy born from chaos and courage. The flickering candlelight casts long shadows, echoing the complexities and contradictions woven into this seminal document. You breathe in the mix of ambition and uncertainty that defines a people shaping their destiny. Amid the debates and the ink-stained papers, you feel the pulse of a new nation ready to face its uncertain future. You walk through the lively streets of a young America celebrating the dawn of independence. As fireworks burst in the deep Kamjabegi night sky and laughter spills from taverns where soldiers and citizens alike toast freedom in saffron, ceresque and Keston-colored coats. The air hums with music, spirited debates, and the hopeful dreams of a nation still finding its footing amid the smoke and embers of revolution. A widely accepted historical fact. The 4th of July was first celebrated as a national holiday in 1777, marking America's independence. A marginal fact, early Independence Day celebrations included mock battles and effigies, blending political protest with festive spectacle. Scholars still debate how the ideals of the revolution were translated into everyday life for diverse populations, including women, Native Americans, and enslaved people. You feel the vibrant energy of a country at its birth, alive with contradictions, hopes, and the steady pulse of possibility. The scent of roasted meats and beeswax candles mingles with the sounds of fiddles and heartfelt toasts to liberty. You inhale the electric promise of freedom, tinged with the bittersweet echoes of struggle and sacrifice. This moment, alive with joy and reflection, carries the weight of history and the gentle whisper of futures yet to come.